Well, now we're, I guess, talking about dystonia. And when we talk about dystonia, for me, in understanding, I mean, I've said before that the closer you get to the truth, the simpler the solution. Dystonia is a very complex issue. We put it in the category of hyperkinetic disorders. The system won't stop muscles from firing. And that's most of what the brain does, is in inhibition, or it's telling things to shut up, because there's an infinite number of possibilities of stuff coming in to your eyes, ears, even the clothes on your body are sending signals, to you in your brain. And that basal ganglia, the on-off button, that off is so necessary, because otherwise you'd be a ball of spasms all the time, rather than determining what you want to do and doing only it. And so when we talk about hyperkinetic disorders, we look at one end of the spectrum, and that's ADHD. And then we look at the other end of the spectrum through a range of things like other kinds of movement disorders, hemibolismus, and all these different kinds of movement systems. But it also includes thoughts, compulsive thoughts are in there. All the things relating to, I can't stop it, I can't tell it to shut up. And the worst is dystonia. It's at the ugliest side of that scale. And so the things that we've done in the past have not been very helpful on the medical side, but even on the chiropractic and even on chiropractic neurology, it's been a very difficult challenge. And the reason is we haven't fully understood it, so that we couldn't address all the issues that are related. It's like a perfect storm of four major problems going on. Like I said before, you can't inhibit, you can't tell things to shut up, and that's the basal ganglia. It's not allowing you to, but it's also a vestibular dysfunction. And that vestibular system is about not only orienting you to your head, to your body, and what's going on in space and you, but it determines the tone of the muscles in your body, and wants to orient them to gravity and orient them to your world. And you're connected to your world. Your brain connects you to you and responds to your world. And if it thinks things are bad, it won't let you do certain things. And then the ocular output dysfunction is an issue where my eyes are wired to my body, but they're also responding to the world that it knows. And if I don't know that there's a part of the world that exists, it won't let me go there, right? If my brain thinks that this area over here in my world doesn't exist, it won't let me go there. It'd be kind of like I'm taking a picture of you and you're standing in front of the Grand Canyon, and I keep going, step back, no, sorry, step back. And then at some point your brain's gonna go, no, you are not making me step back. I'm gonna fall off the cliff. And that's what it thinks. And so when you're in this position, it thinks this is normal. And it thinks that this is the edge of its known world. The edge of its known world that it can see with its eyes, going in that direction. And so we call it an ocular output dysfunction, because the ocular system in the brainstem is making my world. If you look around here in this room, you have created a map of that from a visual point of view. If you hear me speak in this room, you're hearing where I am in the room, but you're also hearing the echoes off the walls, and you're also hearing the buzz of a light fixture that's going bad. And so it gives you this three-dimensional auditory or sound picture or map of this world. And if your brain thinks that this is where the world ends, it will not allow you to go there. And so it will contract muscles. And that's why, when you have the dystonia and it's pulling you this way and you try to come this way and then it brings you back, that's because it thinks that it just took you to the edge of the world and you're going to fall off. And so it will not allow you to go there. And so what we have to do is work with that part of the system also. And then finally, you have a cortex, the cortex of the brain itself, and the spinal cord have a dysfunction in their integration. Now, integration is interesting because if you think of the nervous system like a computer, you've got your keyboard, that's the sensory input. You're keyboarding into a CPU, and that CPU is what's going to crunch numbers and make decisions and determine the output, and the output is kind of like your screen, right? The things that happen on your screen. And so people with dystonia are having a cortex and a spinal cord dysfunction in the integrative system, which is where the computer decides what to do, and it doesn't know, so it's going to do what it thinks it knows. And so in all of that, there are so many different issues. We're going to have to build the part that is the ability to tell the muscles to shut up. Now that's in the basal ganglia, and in the basal ganglia you have two major loops. You've got a direct loop, that is the on button or the gas pedal, we like to call it in neuroscience, and the globus pallidus pars externa is the brake pedal, but you have other brake pedals that are going to assist it. We'll get to that in a second. But that is the brake pedal. And when they fire at the same time, but because there's shorter number of connections in the direct loop, it gets there first. So if it tells it to contract a muscle, the contraction will happen first, but then that other loop is firing. It has more stops, and then it will follow up by, I contracted it and then I let it go. I relaxed it. And I'm only going to maintain something if I truly want to. And that ability to turn things off is so important, so you're not a ball of spasms. Because the brain has areas, brain and brainstem has areas in it that we call pacemakers, like the thalamus. The thalamus wants to fire all the time. And so the basal ganglia is telling it to shut up when it needs to shut up. And so, and that's a little bit of a complex way that it works. It's pretty magical and mysterious how it works. We have most of the information that we need, I think, to conjecture what that is. But the major player in that brake pedal is called the subthalamic nucleus. That subthalamic nucleus I call the on button of the off button. And if it's not working, you don't have a brake pedal, and it just rolls forward. If you have compulsive thoughts that you cannot get out of, you're struggling with your subthalamic nucleus. If your kid is bouncing off the walls, you have he has a problem, and then you have a problem with his subthalamic nucleus isn't well developed. The cool thing is too, we've developed other inhibitory loops from the front, but they're way up front and they're some of the last stuff to develop. And we call them hyperdirect pathways. And those hyperdirect pathways feed back and assist in that whole process of braking. It's the more mature circuitry relating to social interaction. It allows you to not take offense to things. It allows you to sit back and ponder things rather than immediately reflex, respond, or react is a better way to say it. And so Brodmann's area 9, Brodmann's area 10, Brodmann's area 11 and 12, and 11 and 12 is what I call the absolute no area. It's decided, you've decided for yourself, there are things I won't do. I will not do them. You arrived at it. That's 11 and 12. There are things that you absolutely will do. That's 11 and 12. You chose it. And so therefore, even though you may have really big emotions, you're able to calm that system down. You're able to say, relax, man, to yourself, and you control it. And so those pathways assist in that brake pedal system. And so in building, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is to rebuild the subthalamic nucleus, but we're also trying to build those hyperdirect pathways to assist so that we have multiple braking systems to stop this whole thing from happening. In the vestibular system, we are working to change that system so that you can function in a new way. If you have a hypertonicity, and here's the thing about the vestibular system, it's going to drive muscles that are involuntary. Those are the deep muscles in your body. They're the stabilizers. And that part of the brain, it's brainstem, cerebellum, and extrapyramidal nervous system. It's going to take control of the system, and all of those muscles do the opposite of what the voluntary muscles do. If you put your head back, you extend your neck. We call that cervical neck, cervical extension. But if I like load with a head weight, which is something we do in the office, to change posture, we'll put a little weight, put a pound weight on the head, and the head comes back because it responds to that change in position, tensions, disruption of the visual octal tectal system, and it will pull the head back. But the way it does it is different, right? These muscles actually shorten, they tonally change, and their length changes, and we call those anti-flexors. They're going to keep your head from falling off forward and rolling on the ground, and that, which is handy for bowling, but I don't know how that would work. But in changing that tone, that's one of the issues we have to deal with to not only alter it occasionally, but to get it to modify to where it knows what normal truly is, and it maintains the tone that gives you the rigidity against gravity and the functionality against gravity, and changes in balance and posture, so that it's the way it should be. It's the way it used to be in many cases. Hey, I used to have good posture. I used to have full range of motion. I used to be able to do whatever I want, and now I'm stuck over here, and whenever I try to go over here, I'm going through a series of tremors as I'm fighting with my own body and my own brain, as it's saying, no, I'm not going to let you go there. Listen, you don't know enough about the world that I see, and because I see it that way, I'm going to protect you from yourself. And so we have to convince the brain and redo the reflex system, which that's very difficult. It's not just trying to stretch it out. In fact, stretching it out will make it worse. Why? Because stretching does the opposite of what we think it does. Stretching actually activates nervous system and muscles and causes it to fight. It's a muscle stretch reflex. And so it feels great when you're doing it, but not if it's dystonia or stroke. That can get to where it's just hellacious. It's horrible, right? And so we have to, in that case, this dystonic position, right? It doesn't want to go. We're going to have to turn on all the muscles that we've turned off over and over and over again through stretching. And so same kind of concept. We are not trying to stretch it. We're trying to convince it that the world is over here. We're trying to convince it that the muscles that bring us there and to balance us are actually there, because the brain has lost it. Brodmann's area 312 doesn't know where that is, it's gone. And that's easy to do, right? Because in the map of you, you look at what the map is, and 75% is your tongue, your face, and your hands. And so you got 75% is taken up, so you got 25% left to do all the rest of the real estate of your entire body, right? And so it's easy to lose those things, where they are, maps of and recognition of where those things are. And so we're trying to put that map back together of you, and that map gets shunted into another map called the association area, the Brodmann's area 5 and 7, and that has all the information from your world, sight, sound, smells. I mean, everything, your system telling you about your world. It has a map, and then it puts you in that map. And so now I can orient myself, and then it spits forward into the area. Brodmann's area 4 makes you move, but Brodmann's area 6, which is right in front of it, causes you to do so in context of what's going on in your world. You want to move your arm like this, but there's a dresser here, and you're going to run into it, and the brain says, "Okay, I'll move it, but I'm gonna redesign where I'm going because I'm not going to run into the dresser." So that's the vestibular part. The ocular part, we have to convince the ocular system, the visual tactile system, we have to convince that system that I can go there. In fact, that's a world I want to explore. And I want to have that grid, which is, if you think of a three-dimensional grid, kind of like in Star Wars, you know, when the guy's in the machine, he's going to shoot down the TIE fighters. Wow, boy, that's a memory. Anyway, shoot down those TIE fighters, and he's got this three-dimensional grid. Well, you've got a three-dimensional grid of you, but also of your world around you. If you stand up and rotate around, and this is all brand new science, turn around, that's your parapersonal space. You actually monitor that. You actually feel that. You also feel the shadow of your body, which is very interesting. If you put something in your hand, it becomes a part of you, literally. If you put a stick in your hand, that amoeba-like feeling of your body that goes all the way to the tips of your fingers, once you grab it, it literally, that amoeba-like experience goes all the way to the end of the stick. That's why when you get in your car and you start up your car and drive, you know the dimensions of your car. The more you drive it, the more control you have over it. And you see this parking space, and whoosh, you know that that has the dimensions, that you can get the dimensions of your vehicle in. You feel it. If you look at a crane operator, really cool. You know, he's moving that crane around, and you got this big ball and a hook. You know, his Brodmann's area 312, that's the map of himself, actually extends through his hand all the way to the ball and the hook. That's why he can go very quickly and easily, because literally it's a part of his body. And so here's these dimensions that we have to change, and the dimensions of the world. And imagine that this grid, like that, you know, we're shooting at the TIE fighters, that grid has been smashed over here. And so that's why I say that part of the world doesn't exist. And so we have to reestablish that map, but it's not easy. It's kind of like if you play with cellophane. If that was all cellophane and we smash it inward, try to undo cellophane. You might as well just get another piece, right? It's absolutely exasperating. Well, we're trying to recreate that experience of my world and that map, because it's wired to our ocular output. Here's a cool thing. Can I borrow you for a second here? Okay, so we're gonna play a game with that ocular map. You're gonna stand here. I'm gonna put my finger up, and you're going to touch my finger and touch your nose, and you're gonna go back and forth. Very good. Now close your eyes. Notice how accurate that is. Very good. Okay, now open. Okay, that's all right. No, you can put your arm down now. What we're going to do is, you know where that is in space. You have a grid relating to it. Now, watch this. Okay, you know where this is. Now, look at my middle finger. Look at my ring finger. Look at my pinky finger. Look at my thumb. Okay, you got that? Now we're going to go back to same finger. We're going to touch that and go back and forth. Close your eyes. Slow down. Slow down. Okay, now touch my middle finger. Okay, that's my ring finger. Okay, yeah, see that? Even with that, I told her and she could find it. Now my ring finger. Okay, you're a little off. We're gonna play. This is actually good. Okay, now my pinky finger. Okay, all right. Can you see her grid is off? So we're gonna do some things and play with that. No. Good. Keep doing it. Okay, right there. Okay. Now I want you to find my thumb. Okay. Well, you're in the neighborhood. Now relax here. I'll be right back. I'm gonna get something. That's all right. That's good. This is awesome. And this is cool when it doesn't work, because now we can demonstrate her grid is just a little off. And if you really looked at it, you can't see it very well from the side, but she was off about the same each finger.
That's good.
So the grid is shifted. So now what we're going to do is, you're going to touch with that. You're going to touch my finger, touch your nose, back and forth. Okay, so I'm reestablishing all of this. Okay, now open, keep your eyes open and stop. I'm gonna put a little bit on your nose, okay, and on your finger, okay? And this is gonna turn up Brodmann's area 312. It experiences the heat. Does that feel
peppermint?
easier? Yeah, it's just peppermint oil, okay? And it's Brodmann's area 312. Now slow it down, close your eyes, okay? Now, find my middle finger now. Okay. Now that's my ring. That's my ring. Okay. Okay. All right. Now my
ring. But
ring.
I went to it.
Yeah, you did, and then you went back to it. Okay, that's my
ring.
pinky.
Oh.
Okay. All right. And that's a part of the grid that we're going to have to be working. There's my pinky. Can you find my thumb? No. Back to your. Okay. All right. And so now we know that this area right in here actually needs some help, and we're going to do specific exercises called microsaccades to reestablish, to restore that grid into its finite, perfect. Your glasses are right there. Its finite, perfect form. And then we've got, we said there was, what was the four things? The four things were it can't inhibit, vestibular dysfunction, and the ocular output, but also then the spinal cord. We think of the spinal cord as just a conduit from the brain to the body, but actually the brainstem and the spinal cord actually do have some of their own functions, kind of like their own little brain. And one of those functions is the central pattern generators, which you're creating the effect of movement, especially all the movements that relate to walking. Remember, I said that the neocortex has to do with two major things, right? Talking and walking, which are the two most difficult things that we do. The neocortex, or the upper brain, I would put them both as the most difficult. I call them both number one. The walking is the most difficult because it's the most systems that have to work together, and the physics it has to overcome in order for you to walk on 2 feet. But then the other number one is talking, because it is by far the most refined movement that you have. I have a patient that just started working with, and she was struggling to talk, and she has dystonia, and she also has some other issues in development. And we started working with, part of what we're doing is working with her tongue. And by working with her tongue, I mean we're vibrating her tongue, we're putting different oils on her tongue so she can taste with it. We're brushing her tongue with a brush and she can talk better. And it happened pretty quick. Well, what are we really trying to do? Brodmann's area 312, the map of your body. If you don't know where it is and what it's doing, you can't control it. And so we're turning that up. And so those are the two most difficult things we do. And the spinal cord and the brain, those integrators have begin to dysfunction in dystonia. So we have to do things that are going to force that computer to operate in a different way. What's cool is most of the time with dystonia, that thing happened for whatever reason, whether it's an injury or a blood flow issue or whatever. It's usually something that they acquired later on in life. And when that happens, I'm just trying to remind it what it used to do in integration rather than teach it like it's the first time that their brain has ever seen it. And so those are the 4 issues. If you don't address all those 4 issues, it's probably coming back, even if what you're doing is helpful. And so getting those things all to come together, they were the perfect storm. And so if you do all the things that stop the storm, the whole thing stops. The way to describe it is like a tornado. If you spin a tornado in the opposite direction, it's not a tornado anymore. It's calm. So, any questions?
When I have a dystonic storm, I have cervical dystonia and generalized dystonia. So my head and my arms are out of control, and then my legs are coming up, my whole body is flopping around. I look like I'm having grand mal epileptic seizures, yet I can still talk. Sometimes my jaws are clenched and I'm like doing this, but usually I try to make jokes with people because I feel like I look like an idiot and I'm trying to make you feel more comfortable, so I'll make like Tourette's jokes and that's just my personality. And so then they really don't believe me. And they say, well, you can talk, so you're faking it. And then they had me committed because I was having these seizures, and they think I'm just crazy.
Well, that's because they seriously do not understand neurobiology at all. Because when you study seizure activity and seizure behavior, there is an entire category of seizures that are what we call simple. And those simple seizures, you're fully awake. Right? You do not go out. Then there's generalized seizures, those simple seizures, and if you do an EEG, you notice, hey, it's only one of the leads that's giving input, so it's only one area, and that's why it's only moving one arm, or it's creating this massive rush of emotions that are horrible all of a sudden out of the blue. And they don't get the idea that there's a whole categories. Well, let's make it even simpler, right? The simpler, the closer you get to the truth, the simpler the solution. So let's take a look at it before we get to the generalized seizures. Let's take a look at what we call epileptiform disorders. There are 2 kinds of issues within the brain. It's running too low frequency-wise. It's running too high frequency-wise. If it's running too low, like let's say I'm running too low and my leg is tingling because the sensory system in the brain, 312, the map, isn't functioning nearly as well. And so it's not perceiving, even though it might even be receiving information, it's not able to integrate that. It doesn't have enough juice in its computer system to be able to tell, oh, the leg's there. Turn off that feeling of it's gone, that numbness and that. But I also could have the opposite problem where that area is jacked way too high. And now I'm experiencing waves of that. I don't even know where it is anymore, right? And so the where it's running too low is either degeneration or it's developmental. I didn't build the circuitry up enough, and the ability of those cells to function at that level on a regular basis. That's where it's running too low. Where it's running too high, we call epileptiform disorders. Now, that doesn't mean epilepsy. It's one of the three on the list of possibilities, but those cells are running too hot. Those three categories are epilepsy, seizure disorders, and pseudoepileptiform disorders. Epilepsy, you're born with, or soon after it shows up, right? But you've got it, and it's genetic. And here's one of the things that is really, really important. Those cells are healthy. They're healthy, and genetically they're predisposed to just going rogue and firing on their own rather than waiting to be told what to do. Okay? Seizure disorders, the second category, is stuff that comes later, and it, like I say, there's two major categories of seizures. There's those that are simple and you remain conscious during it, and it can be different things. It doesn't have to be movement. It could be I'm just feeling something. It could be a rush of horrible emotions and that. But in it, those cells are running too hot and that are creating it. And knowing where it is and how it's acting is literally telling you where the problem is, right? If this arm is starting to move because of it, it's Brodmann's area 3, 1, 2, and 4 up here, feeling and movement. Which one is more? Probably 4, because it's actually moving, right? If I have just 3, 1, 2, it's just going to be a feeling, okay? And it's not going to move. And so that's seizure disorders. There are 6 of them, by the way, if you want to look it up. Then, before you accuse somebody of faking it, right? And then over here, you've got 6 categories of generalized seizure disorders, and they do different things. One of them is tonic-clonic. One of them is tonic-clonic, and which we used to call grand mal seizures. But the rest of them all have their own individual characteristics, and what's going on tells you where it mostly is happening. But in an EEG, when you're having a seizure in a generalized fashion, all the leads are going to be running and showing you it's running too hot. The third one is called pseudoepileptiform disorders. Now, before I go there, say the other thing that's really important to know is they're healthy cells, and genetically they are making that happen, okay? Rather than sick cells. Well, pseudoepileptiform disorders is sick cells that have gone rogue, and there's a reason for that. If you have a cell and you tell it what to do over and over again, it's going to change, it's going to grow, it's going to become more responsive to change. That's neuroplasticity. In fact, my favorite definition of neuroplasticity is the ability of the nerve to thrive on stress and to grow in stress. And so that, and it's getting a better and better, that city that we call the nerve is becoming a better machine as we go. Well, if we look on the other side of the number line, transneural degeneration is where the cell is getting sicker, it's getting worse. If you don't use it,
you lose it.
You lose it, exactly. Why does everybody know that? That's really cool, because so much of what we've been taught is wrong, and yet that reigns supreme. It's right. Biology is grow or die. And so in this direction, in the negative direction, transneural degeneration, the cell is not firing. Remember, it needs 3 things: oxygen, carbs and sugars, and activation. And it needs protein to activate, but it needs activation. So that means you could have enough protein, but you're not activating it, and so it's going to die. And it goes in that direction, transneural degeneration. The cell starts to break up internally because stuff isn't being replaced when it needs to be replaced. And so, or let's say it got injured. You got whacked with a baseball bat, or you're playing baseball and you got hit with a ball or whatever, and you got this damage in the brain, and that cell is breaking down. Well, genetically, it's not predisposed to do that. It's doing it because it's sick and dying. And you would think that if that's the case, it won't fire very easily. And that is not the case. Actually, it wants to fire to save its own life. And so it becomes hypersensitive through changing the permeability within the wall of the cell. And as it does that, it gets more and more reactive. And so if you've got a neurotransmitter that would normally fire it, and that's the only one that will fire it, then now we're going to respond to any neurotransmitter and make it fire. Even toxins will make it fire. And that's why it's really going rogue. It's trying to save its own life. It's not because it's genetically predisposed to run hotter than everything else. And so we've got to fire it. Here's the issue. It's severely fatigable because it's losing when a mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, when a mitochondria is doing its job, it's wearing out. And so usually if we're firing it, it's in real time, the DNA is activated in the nucleus, and we're making those that will replace what we're using. It's a constant cycle. Well, now we're losing more and more and more of the mitochondria and not replacing them. So now I can fire it really easily, but it won't maintain what we call a spike train. Spike train is it fires, and then it fires, and then it fires, and then it fires. Another example of a spike train would be fire, 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 fire. But in a transneurodegenerative cell, it'll go fire, 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 fire. It poops out, right? And so we have to be able to observe that, oh my gosh, this is fatigable. It will tell us that it's the problem, right? Let's say I do a pupillary reflex and I shine a light into the eye and the pupil responds. Cool. It did really well, all right? And as I make it, get smaller, I'm watching, and then I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then it starts to do this. We call it hippus. That's where it's fatigued, right? It can't do that forever. It runs out of chemistry, right? So then we do it on the other side, and it does it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoa, 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 hippus. This is the one that's having the problem. And we got to work with it, but we got to work within what we call its metabolic capabilities. Its fatigability would make more sense, right? And so we got to push those cells so that they will want to get stronger. We want to induce or evoke plasticity within that cell so that it's replacing stuff. If you should have 1,000 mitochondria in each cell, in each nerve cell. Well, imagine if we're down to 600, and that cell is going to be weak and unable to maintain those spike trains that it has to do its function, and that. So now we're gonna press that issue right up to the fatigability, right up to the edge of the metabolic capability, so that tonight, as they go to bed and go to sleep, and as those cells begin to go through their healing cycle from the parasympathetic nervous system, then they're making more mitochondria, and that cell's getting stronger. There's another cool activity that we call inhibition. And remember, I said inhibition is one of the most common things that the brain does. It's telling stuff not to do stuff and telling it to shut up and that. Well, that inhibitory loop, if I fire a nerve, if I fire it, I said before that we go through immediate early gene response. That's the cellular housekeeping. It has to do that first, but then it fires, and then it has to reset. Both of those cost energy to do. So I can actually inhibit it. It's a different neurotransmitter that does that. The most common in the brain is GABA-aminobutyric acid. And when it hits, it's going to cause only the cell housekeeping, right? Only the immediate early gene response. It's not going to cause it to fire, and it's not going to cause it to reset. So now all that energy goes to healing. And so that is a way, one of my strategies when I have pseudoepileptiform disorders, I'm actually using the same cells on the opposite side of the brain to inhibit those cells, so that as I inhibit those cells, they're getting well faster. They're able to get it together and become more plastic as we go. And so it literally tells you, the closer you get to the truth, the simpler the solution. If I'm dealing with true epilepsy or true seizures, I am always going to be working with the opposite side. Because if I drive it, if I do the behaviors that seizure disorder or epilepsy is doing, I'm going to jack it up even more. So I have to inhibit it. With pseudoepileptiform disorders, I'm going to directly affect it unless it's so fragile that it won't even let me do that. Then I'm going to inhibit it for a while. Then I'll come over when it's healthy enough, and I'll get those cells to become healthier and stronger. And so knowing what you're dealing with means everything. I have a patient who has seizure disorder of her speech area, province area 44 and 45. We call it Broca's. And those who have tried in the past have been working with Broca's. And I tried it, when I first did my exam, and it was apparent that I made her worse. I was driving the seizure activity to a higher level. And so then I immediately switched to the other side, Brahman's area 44 and 45 on the right side. And as I drove that, as we stimulated and expressed it, all of a sudden it's like the brake was taken off and she could talk. Okay? It's because I was inhibiting that activity. And so the strategy in that is, I'm going to do that on a regular basis in our activities in the clinic here, but I'm also trying to build this opposite side so that whenever I do it, it's constantly keeping this at bay. So I want this, if this is Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, and this is Pee Wee Herman, right? I'm driving it and I'm trying to develop it to the point where this is even way bigger and stronger than Arnold Schwarzenegger, that this is Iron Man now, so that whenever it fires, it keeps that at bay. And so that's the strategy with that, whereas with seizure and epilepsy, whereas at the other end of the spectrum with the pseudoepileptiform disorders, I'm trying to build it up so that it's like the one on its cohort on the other side of the brain.
When you say build up and you're talking about, it seems so simple, and the tools that you use, can you explain those? Because people are going, but what do you actually do to build that up? What do you mean by build that up?
Yeah.
And it's very simple, and it doesn't seem like that would work, but
yeah.
I can testify it's working.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we're using what a regular neurologist would normally do in an exam. Here's one of the underlying secrets, right, in functional neurology. Don't tell anyone. But in it, if you can test it, when you're testing an area of the brain, you're stimulating it, and therefore we call it a therapeutic opportunity, right? If we find that an area has a problem, the thing that we did to test it, we can use to drive it. It's just like a reflex, right? I hit my knee and I get a reflex, but it's really, really, really light. I can just keep hitting it, and it's going to cause the spinal cord inside my spinal cord here. It's going to cause the area that relates to that series of muscles here that reflex governs, and that it's going to increase the amount of activity in the spinal cord. So I'm using basic stuff that we would normally use to test these areas. If I want to test Brodmann's area 8, which relates to moving the eyes in that direction, right? The opposite direction, does contralateral or opposite movement. So if I want to test it, I'm going to do what's called saccades. I'm going to look directly in front, and then I'm going to look out and back and out and back and out, and that. So I test it on both sides, and this side is worse, which means it's the right Brodmann's area 8. So now what I can do is, knowing that, I can literally look out and back and out and back and out and back. That's an exercise. And as soon as I'm going, I'm done, right? As soon as I get a little tension in the back of my skull, every fatigue pattern is different. And that's one of the big things I'm doing when I'm working with a patient, is I'm learning their fatigue pattern and teaching them what their fatigue pattern is, because those are weak areas. And if you listen to the fatigue pattern, it's going to tell you more about the person and what they're dealing with, and that. But once I know that area, there's other things that I can do, to make that happen. I can turn my head, which makes my eyes go that way. That's a reflex. I can use that vestibular ocular reflex to drive that system, and the cool thing about the reflex is it's hotter, it's got more energy, and so we're going to feed energy into that system that's weak, that needs help, so that it can grow faster. And it would be kind of like if you're really tired and weak and you're trying to do something and you can't, and you call your brother and he comes in and he's encouraging you and maybe even helping just a little bit, spotting you, and all of a sudden you're doing way better. That would be like using the reflex systems. And that's one of the strategies that I have, is I'm going to look at, can I use a reflex that does this to juice the voluntary system? Can I use the involuntary system to juice the involuntary system so they can grow faster? And so, and at the end of the day, and I have two specialties. I've got my specialty of fixing spines, we call it structural correction, but also functional neurology. But still, for me, it's all the same. It's all one principle, and that's the law of adaptation. I'm going to try to get the system to adapt in the direction we want it to go. I want to get it to grow in that direction, not just go in that direction. And so as that grows, the system changes, and when it's changed enough, the symptoms go away, because the symptoms are a product of that issue that is not functioning the way it should. And so we're putting that whole system back together again. It would be like riding a bicycle. Riding a bicycle is three things. It's pressure on the handlebars, pressure on the pedals, and balance. Let's say you have a problem with pressure on the pedals. Well, if I'm having a problem with that, I'll take you off the bike and I'll test you in different ways. I'll test the different aspects of creating pressure on the pedals. Once I've found out where you're having your problem, I'm going to start working with that, and I'm going to watch it as it continues to get better and better and better and better. And as it does that, I'm comparing it to the other side, right? So that I know this is working at a progressively higher and higher level. Then I'm going to retest the test I did for pressure on the pedals. Then I'm going to put you back on the bike, because I don't care about those things. I care about the bike. I'm a functional neurologist. If you can now do specific toe exercises or whatever, that's really cool. But if you still can't ride the bike, I failed. And so then I'm going to put you on the bike, and I'm going to compare you in riding the bike to what you were doing before, and I want it to do possibly better than it's ever done. And that's usually our goal, is to go beyond, because some of this stuff is developmental from when you were a kid. You didn't get the musculoskeletal, neuromuscular skeletal skills that allow you to do that. And you say, wow, I just really never could get it down. Well, when you don't have the capacity to do the functions that come together to make bike riding. You can't, right? And to force a kid to try under those circumstances is cruel. It's just plain cruel. It's the same as when you've got an autistic kid and you want him to respond to the world. You say, this kid is a problem and he does weird things. And my comment is always, if you saw the world the way he sees it, you might respond the same way. His world isn't the same world you're in. The way he sees things, it's more like one of those ugly fun houses where everything is distorted and everything is different and everything is weird. And so when he sees all of that, he can't respond in an appropriate way. Also, he doesn't have the circuitry developed to allow him to see normal behavior. And because he can't see normal behavior, he can't learn more normal behavior. That's a lot of issues to try to overcome. And just like we work with autistic kids and dyslexic kids, and we're working with trying to change the circuitry. Well, let's say we change the circuitry, but that doesn't mean he'll know how to use it, right? He automatically starts to do things a little differently, but very often inappropriately, because he's never used it before, because he didn't have the capacity, he didn't have the circuitry that would allow him to. And so the activities that he needs to go through include a learning curve, right? What is it? What is that phrase? It says the good judgment is a product of experience, and experience is a product of bad judgment. And so even though I get the circuitry, I have to play with it. I have to experience it, and I have to, now I'm observing. I look at what I said and I can see, wow, Mom's face is different. Well, I never saw her face before. I never observed it. And now I can see, wow, she kind of looks mad. What did I say? You know, I said something that was inappropriate. I didn't even know. And then I couldn't even tell that it adversely impacted. Those are highly social skills. And it's even worse because it's usually guys, and we don't have nearly as much real estate. Women have twice as much brain real estate relating to social interaction, observance skills, the ability to hear and see, hear vocal inflections and cues and that. And so imagine a kid who's trying to develop that circuitry, and he just doesn't have the capacity. And then finally he's starting to get the capacity, but he's never done the behaviors appropriately the way. He has to learn. He has to go, you know what, that didn't work very well. Ooh, I could have had a smoother way to say that, and that, or the way I was gesturing or the way I was standing when I said it made it come across a little harsh, and I didn't mean for that. And those are all Brodmann's Area 9. And that they're way up front, and those are some of the last things to develop. So hopefully that gives you a better, more broad concept of dystonia. Dystonia just means its tonal quality is not functioning the way it's supposed to. And the fact that it's in the neck just means, hey, we got a lot of brainstem involved with this. The fact that it's also going into the body means we got spinal cord too, farther down. And so we literally watching it and letting it describe for you what's going on, it gets down to, okay, it simplifies through the observation process, it simplifies what's really going wrong so that we can truly design. And that's the funnest part for me. Besides teaching, the funnest part is designing things that would potentially have an impact to restore those functions. It's a dysfunction, it's a dystonia, so let's function it.